This week's prophecy update, similar to Mike Clapham, was difficult to prepare because of a lot of extra work at work and some other things that are going on in my life in terms of some prophecy ministry type things. But then there was this situation where it was just, where do I start? What do I not cover? So we're not going to do Thyatira this week again because I do want to cover a few of these. I know it's a teaser. It's like, but I really felt compelled to, well, mainly because I didn't have any time just to barely get this done. So Thyatira next week, Lord willing, if we're all still here. It was, as I talked to some of my prophecy conference speaker friends, one of the things that struck me this week that we talked about was, again, convergence. Everything that is significant in the Bible from an end times standpoint, that is significant prophetically, is in play. Almost every, and I've used this slide for a while, these different lines of prophecy, the economy and transhumanism, things going on with the world empires and Israel and those developments, then other signs and catastrophes in the world and that type of thing. And really, everything is in play. The one thing I think that is most, one of my friends said this week, this thing is going down. And I think he meant everything worldly is going down as we get closer to the return of Jesus Christ. And people that I know that have studied this topic for many years are, all of them, unanimous in their assessment that we've never really seen anything like this before. So this week we're going to look a little bit at the economy. We'll look at some things going on with the world empires in Iran and Iraq, and that'll pretty much take up all of our time today. There's also sort of this overarching thing that is behind everything that I'm going to talk about today, and just let me give you a preview of that up front. Mike mentioned it in his sermon in first hour about lawlessness. This is something that's going to increase in the end times, and we know that there's a coming world leader who will be a man of lawlessness. He will be, as Mike said, a rebel. He'll be possessed by Satan himself. And so anything that you might think, I know there are some people teach that the Antichrist will come from the Muslim world, and people who object to that say, oh no, a good Muslim would never go into the temple of God and declare himself to be God. But my point, my response to that is, who said he was going to be a good Muslim? You need to remember that whoever this man, if he comes from America or Europe or the Islamic world, this man, the one difference is this man is going to be directly possessed by Satan himself. That'll be only the second person, at least if the scriptures have given us identity of all of them, only the second person in human history to be possessed directly by Satan. Judas Iscariot being the first one. So when you factor that into the equation, again, whether he would come from the American world, the Islamic world, the European, any of those different scenarios, keep in mind that when he comes to his full essence as the man of sin, the man of lawlessness, he's going to be possessed by Satan. And I would encourage you then to assume that when that happens, all bets are off. And it may be somebody that is in our world today that we're becoming more and more familiar with. Or it may not. Don't know the exact timing. I'm just saying that all the things that are in place. So we have the spirit of lawlessness, and the other thing is this spirit of deception, which Mike also alluded to in the first hour. And Mike and I, by the way, we didn't talk about We did not talk. It's like sort of like the magic trick, you know. See, we didn't have any. I didn't talk to you today, or the old who was that? Kreskin. But the other thing is this deception that's in the world and people's inability to see things clearly. I think this problem is only going to get worse and worse as we get closer to the end. And at this point, I'm not saying don't pray for revival. I know there are people that are praying for revival. But absent a massive revival of an epic scale, this thing isn't changing as we get closer to the end. It's only going to get worse, and you need to be prepared to that. I'll give you some examples of this deception that operates on many levels. Now, this has been, building casinos has been a long-time plan of people that, oh, you know, that'll stimulate the economy. Well, what's the problem? In the Northeast especially, it started in Atlantic City. It used to be you could go to Atlantic City or Las Vegas. Now you can go to a casino, Columbus, you have the racinos at racetracks, you have this. And so in the Northeast, they're having trouble. The revenues in the states are falling because there's so many casinos. And here's a casino, a relatively new one in Atlantic City that costs, I believe it costs $2.1 billion to build. They issued a notice to their employees this week that unless they get some state assistance, they're going to close down by the end of the summer. Now, I've been to Atlantic City not to go to these places. I actually probably, I would say it would be in the top 2 of the worst business trips I've had to take in my life. We had a deposition that was could only be scheduled at 7:30 to start at 7:30 on a Friday night in downtown Atlantic City. And if you've ever been to Atlantic City, there's a vast difference between these nice new casinos out at the beach in downtown Atlantic City. One of the worst slums you've ever been in. The other trip, by the way, is I had to go to a deposition, and my client told me to fly down on a Tuesday to New Orleans, and it turned out to be the first Tuesday in February, which I get to New Orleans, and there's a lot of, that's called Mardi Gras, and it was awful. So these people are, oh, well, we'll do this, we'll get these casinos, everything will be great, we'll get revenue, let alone all the social problems that come along with these things. Now they're saying, oh, we're not getting the revenue that we thought because everybody's building a casino. Well, duh. There's little glitches that are coming in the economy. Here's an example. David Stockman, by the way, has a very good article on it's Contra something blog. David Stockman, he was the budget director under Nixon, was a congressman for a while. And he's, again, if you're prone to depression, suicidal thoughts, and that type of thing, I wouldn't go read his blog. But I think a lot of what he says is very correct, and he has a very good analysis of Coach. Coach has been going great, been growing like crazy. The stock is up. The person who founded it is a multi-billionaire. He's cashed out. He's retired. He's got all of his money. Now this week they closed 70 stores because it costs money to operate a store. And if your sales don't continue to increase, you have that fixed cost of a lease that you have to pay every month for the next 20 years to get prime spot in a shopping mall. But if your sales don't, the economy glitches, and people don't want to buy fancy, expensive, nice leather handbags and wallets and that type of thing, your sales are going to plummet. And so they've announced they're going to close 70 stores. Their stock is down about, I think, 37 to 60% in the very near term. So this I think is going to be symptomatic. The stock market is great, but they've been pumping all kinds of money into the economy. I'll have a comment about that in a moment. And then you have this thing with the IRS and their inability to find their emails.
This is a pattern of abuse, a pattern of behavior that is not giving us any confidence.
I'm going to restart that.
This is a pattern of abuse, a pattern of behavior that is not giving us any confidence that this agency is being impartial. I don't believe you. This is incredible.
I have a long career. That's the first time anybody has said that you do not believe me. I
don't believe you.
That's fine. We can have a disagreement. I'm willing to stand on our record. I'm willing to remind you that it was not buried in 27 pages. Most of that 27 pages is exhibits. When asked about the custodians, we advised you
forthcoming,
which we knew for one day.
Being forthcoming is to say,
I'm sorry.
You know what, investigators, Congress who's investigating this about
Will you
this?
let him answer the question?
I didn't ask him a question.
Yes, you did.
Being forthcoming.
The gentleman
I control the time.
From Wisconsin.
I control the time.
I realize that disrupting a hearing sort of
No, come on.
No.
people, but the gentleman from Wisconsin.
I am not yielding time. I control the time.
He has a time.
Here's what being forthcoming is.
Regular order.
If we are investigating criminal wrongdoing, targeting of people based on their political beliefs, and the emails in question are lost because of a hard drive crash that is apparently unrecoverable, which a lot of IT professionals would question, and you don't tell us about it until we ask you about it, that is not being forthcoming.
And that's true.
I yield back the balance of my time.
That's not true.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman has yielded back.
Well, this is doing some work with this type of thing in discovery. This is not a credible position that the IRS is taking. It's unless you almost have to pulverize a hard drive to get rid of the information. And now it's not just her, it's not just Lois Lerner, it's 6 other key people. Steve Stockman and a congressman from Texas proposed some legislation over the weekend, called it the Tell the IRS that the dog ate my tax records legislation, that you can use the same thing. But this is scandalous. I mean, these people need to go to jail. Now, John Koskinen is, I think he's from Cleveland originally. He was the director. You might recognize him. He was the head of the federal office in charge of the Y2K thing back in 1999, as people got ready for that. So and I've met him, but I'm just saying I don't care whether somebody told you that before. Now, I don't believe him either. Financial Times noted this is sort of related to what I mentioned earlier, is that central banks have now been putting a lot of this extra money that they're printing into the equity markets. Well, what's that doing? Raising the stock prices, because there's all that extra money. Stock market goes up, asset values go up, people that have money get more money, but it increases prices. Because of but the people down here aren't making more money. And inflation is now, they said this today, if they figured inflation the way they did back in the 80s, it would be well over 10%. And I think if you've been to the grocery store and other places, you realize that for the government to be saying that inflation is 2 or 3%, they're lying to you, just like the IRS is lying. The people in the IRS are lying to Congress about the emails. This is what the Financial Times said this week. Central banks around the world, including China's, have shifted decisively into investing in equities, that's stocks, as low interest rates have hit their revenues. According to so you're not making any money on interest, the banks aren't making any money on interest. A cluster of central banking investors has become major players on world equity markets, says a report to be published this week by the Official Monetary and Financial Institution Forum, OMF, a central bank research and advisory group. The trend could potentially contribute to overheated asset prices, it warns. Central banks are traditionally conservative and secretive managers of official reserves. Although scant details are available of their holdings, OMF's first global public investor survey points out that they have lost revenues in recent years as a result of low interest rates, which they slashed in response to the global financial crisis. And then this, the report, seen by the Financial Times, identifies $29 trillion in market investments, including gold, held by 400 public sector institutions in 162 countries. This is not, I do not see how this ends well. In fact, there's one of the blogs, I think it's Zero Hedge this morning, has a great post that has an article from the Los Angeles Times that talk about how great it is to have the stock market going up. This is so great for the economy. Now, what they tell you is that the article in the LA Times was written in the spring of 1987, just before the massive crash in the fall of 1987, and you would think that it was describing exactly what's going on in the markets today. Well, now I'm going to turn to the Middle East, and we're going to look at that for the bulk of the time that I'm going to share with you this morning. It's, again, very difficult to organize this just because there are so many things going on in the Middle East. And we know from prophecy that the Middle East is an incredibly significant part of the world. Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 all reference these empires that are going to be existent in different parts in the Middle East through the end of times. And it's interesting that some of those that we look at and say, oh yeah, that was fulfilled historically, and I mentioned that this last week about the prophecy about the ram and the goat, which relates to Persia and Greece. It also says in that passage in Daniel chapter 8 that this applies in the end, this is in the end times, that some of these things are going to be taking place. So it may be one of these prophecies that have double fulfillment, and I don't think a lot of people, even those who study Bible prophecy, have looked into it. But here's a headline from the New York Times: as moderate Islamists retreat, extremists surge unchecked. And what they're finding is that, this is from the Telegraph or Mail in England, is that in Tunisia, which is where the Arab Spring started about 3 years ago, to Libya, is that, everybody says, oh, Tunisia, that's a great example of what's going on, and Libya, that's another good example. But they're not. They're big problems now because the radical extremists, the extremist Islamists, are taking over in both countries, both in Tunisia and Libya. Libya is significant because Libya was one of the major oil producers of the world, and as it went through its revolution, its oil production pretty much ceased. Now, there were other places of the world that have been able to step up production and fill that gap of, I think they produced around 10% of the world's oil supply in Libya. And so there were other countries. Saudi Arabia can increase production. Iraq was bringing more people online. But the problem now is with the issues in Iraq. What happens if Iraq's oil production disappears from the world markets? There's not enough capacity around the world to make up that difference. So if there's short supply, what does economics teach us? Or not call it economics, what does common sense teach us? That things will increase in price. And so $4 gas, a gallon gas, may seem like a bargain in a couple, 3 years down the road. It just depends how this thing Libya continues to unfold and how Iraq goes. But so Britain, this is a article sort of saying, oh, the Prime Minister of Great Britain says, look at Libya, it's really great, everything is great in Libya. And now people are going to Libya saying, have you been to Libya lately? Have you seen what's going on? Have you seen that? And then there's Iraq. Incredibly significant things going on there, and they change by the day and the hour. Just a little bit historically. It was about 100 years ago this month that World War I started. Now, some Bible prophecies teachers, Arnold Fruchtenbaum would be one of them, would take the position that Jesus talked about there would be birth pangs. And one of the signs of that would be wars and rumors of wars. And so Arnold Fruchtenbaum takes a position, which other people agree with, that the beginning of the birth pangs for the end times started with the first Great World War, World War I, and have continued to increase throughout the 1900s and now into the 21st century. So about 100, but it was, I think, around the end of June in 1914 in Sarajevo, later in Yugoslavia. Remember they had the Olympics in Sarajevo a number of years ago. By the way, there's a great blog, a great thing online. All those wonderful facilities that they had for the Olympics when they were held in Sarajevo, go look at what they look like now. They're barely still standing. Ski jumps and things are falling down. But in Sarajevo, about 100 years ago, Archduke Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated, and that over the next weeks and months led to the beginning, and soon the world was in a great world war. It was that, and that's instructive as we kind of go look through these events. We know that there are certain things prophesied. We know there's a war in Ezekiel 38 and 39. We know that there are some prophecies about Elam and Jeremiah. We know that there are a prophecy in Isaiah 17 about the destruction of Damascus. We know that there's a whole book that's devoted to the destruction of Edom, which I believe to be the Palestinian people. That's Obadiah. Now the question is, what triggers all of these things? What's the trigger? And that's what we don't quite know. And sometimes the trigger is something that doesn't appear to be incredibly significant, like the assassination of the Crown Prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and his wife in Sarajevo by I believe, a Bosnian Serb. I believe the gentleman was Muslim. But it's these little events like that that somehow get magnified, and it may be that way as we see things unfold prophetically. But 100 years ago, during World War I, a couple guys, one was French, one was English, Sykes and Picot, got together, and they could tell that as a result of, they planned that part of what was going to happen in World War I was that the Ottoman Turkish Empire that had controlled vast regions of northern Africa and the Middle East and Europe, almost, in fact, for hundreds of years, they were essentially knocking on the gates of Vienna to try to take that over. They decided, how are we going to split up the Middle East? And so they decided that they're going to split it up between British and French. And then there was also area that was to be given to Russia, because Russia was an important power in that region at the time. So the Tsar agreed that they would give them Istanbul in that area of Turkey. This was the French area A, this was the British area. There were some areas of joint control, but you see this one area over here, which was a very difficult area to divide up, and that's the modern-day country of Iraq. Iraq always was a fake country. Here's a little bit better graphic to show. I mean, it's a real country, but its reason for existence was fake. It was to control whatever was there, but it needed a strong dictator to control it. There was no way, because the Shia and Sunni divide ran right through Iraq. The Kurdish people had a great interest in parts of the area, and this is really before the oil wealth was really discovered and developed in this area, but it was a major problem. And they thought, well, we'll just play around and we'll make up a map. So the British got the area here west of the Jordan River, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, and then the area that became Jordan and Iraq. The French got Syria, Lebanon. That's why they have a French influence there. And so what the map that they drew up in around 1916 is the map that we still are dealing with in geopolitics today. And it may very well be if this is in fact the end times, that what these gentlemen did in their meetings 100 years ago will play out now as Bible prophecy is fulfilled, because all of these fault lines that exist in the Middle East are now in play. What's going on in Iraq is just absolutely incredible. This is a picture of the former Iraqi soldiers who were trying to get away. They were captured by the ISIS, sometimes called ISIL. They're Sunni militias that we actually helped support in the Syrian war. They've come across the border now into Iraq, and they gathered up the soldiers, put them in a ditch, and executed them. And some estimates are as high as 30,000, 40,000 soldiers have been summarily executed. ISIS is a unique terror group. It is now by far the richest terror group in history. Osama bin Laden was able to finance Al-Qaeda with a personal fortune. His father was the great Saudi contractor, the Bin Laden Construction Company. They've been redoing the mosque in Saudi Arabia at Mecca and Medina, massive construction projects. They've constructed, the Bin Laden Construction Company, by the way, constructed the big clock tower that I've shown you pictures of. Now, the second or third tallest building on the earth that stands right next to the great mosque in Mecca. But these guys have gone in, they went in, they stole about over $400 million cash out of banks in Mosul. Other places, they've gathered up the military equipment, the Humvees that we left because they were too expensive to ship home. We left them with the Iraqi army. They're now in control of most of that material, Stinger missiles, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft weapons, probably worth in the low billions of dollars, and they've now are in control of all of that stuff. It's interesting what they've done is to raise money throughout the Muslim world from people that support their cause. Is they've made up these publications like the Sears annual report, and they're distributing them over the internet. Like, you know, we've done this many attacks and we've killed this many people, and you can see that, you know, you'll get a good return on your investment if you give us money. We're actually follow through, and you know, we've taken prisoners, we've taken countries, that type of thing. Here's a picture of their annual report that they've done. So they're raising a lot of money around the world. It's a problem, and they're very tech savvy. They use Facebook and social media. Again, if you're inclined to see things that are disturbing, they have been publishing and uploading videos to their Facebook pages and to their YouTube channels where they go out and show them assassinating the soldiers. There was one video I saw where they were just driving down the road. There were people in their cars they were fleeing. They were trying to leave Mosul and get someplace else. And these guys just drove up alongside them in a pickup truck, and car after car, they just shot and killed everybody in the car. They show the pictures of the car driving off the road and everything. I mean, it's disturbing, but you need to understand what these people are like. These people are evil, personified. The response in the mosque in Baghdad has been for the imams to get together and to ask for the Shias in Baghdad and surrounding areas to form into militias. And for some reason, I'm fascinated by this, because as they do this, all their rallies, hey, here's the new recruits, and everybody's got, you know, an automatic rifle and weapon and plenty of ammunition. These are trucks full of recruits that are coming into the Shia, out of the Shia areas. Here's another rally that they had. The Ayatollah Khamenei announced this week, if you lean towards the Islamic Antichrist viewpoint, which would say that the Antichrist would be the Mahdi. The Islamic Mahdi has a very similar description to the Antichrist in the Bible. the Mahdi described in the Islamic, the scriptures that are holy to Islam, and the Mahdi has a black flag. And the Ayatollah Khomeini announced this week, I don't think it was very well reported, that what's going on is a harbinger of the arrival of the Mahdi. The Ayatollah Khomeini, the spiritual leader of Iran, the spiritual leader of the world's Shia Muslims, believes this is it. That's pretty significant. In the center of the country, there's Iraq. There's a large oil refinery near Baiji, and it's kind of gone back and forth. It's south of Mosul, about 100 miles. It's the first, I think, the second largest oil refinery, the largest gasoline refinery in the nation of Iraq. And at least for a time this week, ISIS, the rebels, the Islamic rebels, took it over, and the guards were fleeing and that type of thing. Here's just a little video that was on CNN the other day, and these people from ISIS are coming from all over the world. This video explains a little bit of that.
Look at his clothes. He's not Iraqi. Ra'ed points out. It's not his real name, speaking to us on condition we conceal his identity. Ra'ed's wife and children are still in Mosul and could be slaughtered. Ra'ed, wanted by ISIS, just escaped with this video he shot on his phone. He believes the man he filmed is Afghan.
So he's saying we're going to go from Mosul to Baghdad to Jerusalem. And he says he was speaking in broken Arabic and clearly wasn't Iraqi.
Ra'ed's experience in the image is a rare glimpse into the murky world of ISIS and how it solidified its grasp.
See, the kid is giving the ISIS fighter a kiss.
Some of the women were even throwing chocolate on them and shouting, "You saved us from the sectarian army, from Maliki's army," Ra'ed says. It's because the army had harmed the people, put too much pressure on them. It's those actions that turn the terrorists into heroes. But Ra'ed says the people will be betrayed. Already ISIS is implementing its harsh interpretation of Islamic Sharia law. Men who wear three-quarter pants get lashed, he says. If there was internet, you would see the worst of their torture. Women can't go out without a male guardian. And he is still shocked his city fell so fast. There were only 200 to 300 ISIS fighters and 40,000 to 50,000 Iraqi security forces. But after fighting for 3 days, they disappeared, Ra'ed says.
This is from the special operations for the anti-terrorism unit.
After moving through, sleeper cells are activated. They are Iraqi. All the groups that were fighting the Americans at the start are now back and with ISIS, Ra'ed explains. Maliki's actions are fueling the fire. American bombing would wreak more havoc than there already is. It's my city. He pauses. His voice starts to crack. The country is destroyed. It's lost, he says. Disbelieve it. After 1,000 years, it won't come back. His eyes fill with tears as he adds, the city of Mosul, once the city of prophets, in a day and night it turned into the city of ghosts and nightmares.
And Wolf, Ra'ed believes that there has to be some sort of political change, that Maliki most definitely needs to go, but he does not necessarily believe that that is actually going to help save his country. But he says at the very least it could begin to ease some of the tensions, perhaps even cause some of the violence to subside. But at the end of the day, he says what people really need to focus on is trying to drive a wedge between ISIS and the other Sunni groups currently fighting alongside it, Wolf.
Well, this is, and again, the other thing that you should take away from this, I think, is the speed with which it happens. We've talked a lot here about the acceleration of Bible prophecies. We get closer to the things. The phrase, Jesus says, "Behold, I come quickly." One interpretation of that phrase is that when things begin to unfold prior to my coming, they're going to happen really fast. And I've used this example of Yankee Stadium. You know, if you watertight Yankee Stadium and chain somebody to the Dale Purdy to the upper deck of the stands there, and you take an eyedropper of water, and you drop, and it's watertight, you drop 1 drop of water every minute. Okay, how long does Dale, and you start at noon, by what time does Dale need to be free before he drowns? Because you're going to double it every minute. So minute 1, or you do 1 drop. Minute 2, you do 2 drops, then 4, then 8, then 16, and on. And the answer is, at 12:45, Yankee Stadium is less than 5 feet deep with water. At 12:50, it's flowing over the top in the next 5 minutes. And that's a picture, I think, of what will happen in the economy, geopolitics, and that type of thing. As we know this acceleration takes place. It happened the first time Jesus came. It's going to happen at the time of his second coming. There's going to be this rapid acceleration, and it's going to be very difficult to keep up on things because they're going to be happening so fast. Sunni insurgents have also moved back towards Syria, taken a border and a drive for establishment of a caliphate. And this shows this area here. It's kind of a light red, but the sun's kind of washed it out a little bit. That's the areas that they've gone to. Mosul, of course, is built near the site of the ancient city of Nineveh. They've even gone down here near Hilah, which is near the ancient city of Babylon, and I'm told that they've taken over, at least for a time, the old city of Babylon. Some people think that that's very significant from a prophetic standpoint. We'll have to wait and see what happens. In an interview at the American Enterprise, or a forum at the American Enterprise Institute the other day, with John McCain and General Jack Keane, McCain said that the situation in Iraq is now grave and that ISIS forces are worse than Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist group on the planet. He says we absolutely must help the Iraqis now or allow ISIS to create a safe haven from which to launch terrorist attacks. We can't allow them to establish a safe haven from which to launch terrorist attacks. And then what is the response of our president? He extended marriage benefits to gay couples. He is a man. See, the lack of benefits for same-sex couples is evil in his mind. What's going on in the Middle East is just politics. So he's going to fight what he perceives to be evil. But churches also do it as well. The Presbyterian Church USA, a mainline denomination, not conservative Presbyterian, voted this week to allow same-sex marriages. They've been talking about it for years, and they finally have voted it in what I've told is an overwhelming vote. They also voted in a thing this week to divest from some of their investments that they hold in companies that work in Israel and what they call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. This shouldn't be a surprise. A few years ago, the Presbyterians put out this thing called Zionism Unsettled, attacking Christian Zionists and that type of thing. At the same time, this is all going on. About a week and a half ago, a delegation of Christian leaders that are closely associated with Barack Obama, evangelicals, went to Iran to meet with the Ayatollahs to open dialogue about religious cooperation so that we can bring peace to the world. The leader of the delegation was Joel Hunter, pastor of Northland Church in Orlando, Florida. I think he's on the board of the National Association of Evangelicals. Another person that was there was Bob Roberts Jr., pastor of Northwood Church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that has hosted these things called the Global Faith Forum in the past, where they bring in Muslim imams and hear one of the Saudi princes to talk about cooperation between Christianity and Islam. This has been going on for a long time. I remember, this was probably 10 years ago, Rick Warren went and met with Bashar Assad and came back and said, this is great that we have this dialogue and that type of thing. He was heavily criticized at the time, and I think history has borne out that that was a really not too bright thing to do, to go and talk to the Assads, they're butchers. Here's a short interview with Joel Hunter about some of the things that they talked about when these evangelicals were in Iran.
The reason we went was to have religious talks among religious leaders. And this is a relationship that we have been developing for many years now. Most of our conversations have been in Switzerland. And in all of our conversations, we try to stay away from politics, even though all of us have connections with those in our respective governments. And so our conversations were not about policy or about politics. Our conversations were to reduce religious extremism and violence, and that's why we went over. Iran is unique in all of the countries of the Middle East because they define themselves as a religious country. Their leadership is religious. And so therefore, if there is to be trust gained, if there is to be ultimately peace between our countries, it will more likely happen because religious leaders have had a conversation than only if political leaders have tried to negotiate some policy or something. So that really is our understanding of the potential of a religious delegation visiting other religious leaders that will ultimately have a good effect for all of us in the future. And that's our understanding.
And as a final question, would you like to make a last point about your trip to Iran?
I'm very impressed with Shia Islam and about the level of education, the level of dialogue, the percentage of women that are being educated in the schools. I'm overwhelmed by the hospitality and the goodwill and the hopes, the mutual hopes of both of our countries of having a better future together.
Well, Reverend Joel Hunter, thank you so very much again for your time, and I'm glad that you had a wonderful time in Iran.
Thank you very much. I was glad to help share our story.
Okay, let's apply what we learned in first hour. Shepherd or wolf? Wolf. He is massively confused. It wasn't about politics, but all the leaders of Iran are religious people, religious leaders. Well, then maybe it wasn't. I'm telling you, folks, I see these things, and Jim Fletcher my friend Jim Fletcher has a nice little blog post today called Evangelicals Useful Idiots. This would be one of those people. This man is massively confused. Question? Well, supposedly, yeah, the pastor, the Iranian preacher who's still in prison, supposedly they said something to somebody who said they would say something to somebody else. I think there was another part of the interview where Joel Hunter was asked about that, or another place. Writing at the Clarion Project, Ryan Morrow, who does some great stuff, wrote this: Hunter previously fought legislation meant to stop foreign laws, including Sharia, from taking precedent in court over American constitutional rights. He did so alongside a former official of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, a U.S. Muslim Brotherhood entity. Hunter, therefore, has a history of ignoring radical ideologies and track records in the name of interfaith engagement. He has also positioned himself as a counterforce to, in his words, Christian Zionists. It's to be expected that Hunter did not allow thorny issues like Iran's oppression of Christians, support for terrorism, and support of extremist propaganda to get in the way. When asked about his talks with Iranian officials about religious persecution, he said There were sidebar conversations in response to your question, but we didn't go over there to confront people on certain issues. Melanie Phillips, writing about this in the Jerusalem Post on Friday, said that the enemy of my enemy is still my enemy. And she said, Iran understands that Obama's desperation to turn his back on the threats from the Islamic world has left the U.S. weakened and exposed. And how do you think things are going to go with negotiations over Iran now with a nuclear issue, when we're looking at them to help us in Iraq? And they're building intercontinental ballistic missiles, which a defense expert said this week said they have never been used for conventional weapons, intercontinental ballistic missiles. They've only ever been used for nuclear weapons. Well, just a little bit more and we'll wrap this up. In April, there was a FOSNA, F-O-S-N-A, Friends of Sabeel North America. Now, Sabeel is a organization that touts itself as being evangelical. Paul Wilkinson would call them Christian Palestinianists. And they had a conference. They had Max Blumenthal, Miko Peled, and Brian McLaren speaking. And the videos are up. You can watch them. The first one I'm going to play is Michael Peled, who is the son of an Israeli general. Put in context what he is. He's gone to this about we need to bring justice for the oppressed Palestinian people. It's terrible what Israel does to them. They're oppressed. It's just awful. We need to have, and he's a son of an Israeli general. In fact, his niece was killed in a terrorist attack in Jerusalem back in the 90s. I believe it was that Sbarro pizza parlor attack. His then, I believe, 12-year-old niece was blown up and killed in that particular incident. So listen to what he has to say about some of his recounting of history about the peace and negotiations between Israel and the PLO.
Oslo was not an attempt to bring about peace. Oslo was an attempt by Israel to bring the Palestinians to surrender. And because the Palestinians would not surrender, there's no peace. Now, people say that Oslo failed. Oslo did not fail. Oslo is a huge success. It accomplished exactly what it was set to do, to strengthen the Israeli hold on the country and its resources, and to make life harder for the Palestinians. When the Palestinians agreed to the two-state solution under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, they're willing to give up, or Yasser Arafat was willing to give up almost 80% of historic Palestine, the right of the Palestinians to return, and agreed to recognize and make peace with a very state that destroyed Palestine. And because he would go no further, he was accused of not making concessions. So when Bill Clinton brought everybody to Camp David and it didn't work, Arafat was blamed for not making concessions. Arafat was in fact the most consistent voice for peace in the Middle East for 3 decades. From the mid-1970s till the day he died in 2004. He was completely consistent in his willingness to make peace with Israel based on the two-state solution, the whole West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. Israel is not interested, was not interested, and still will never be interested. This is not what Israel is about.
Okay? Do you agree or disagree? Okay? If he was an evangelical, wolf or shepherd? Wolf. Okay, Brian McLaren gives a little bit about his background.
I'd like to tell you a little bit about my journey to end up here. I don't know if you'd recognize that dashing and fascinating fellow. That's not me when I had hair. That's John Nelson Darby, who was mentioned the other day, the founder of dispensationalism, and the founder of a religious sect called the Plymouth Brethren. And that's the group that I was born into. In some ways, I'm extremely grateful I was born into the Plymouth Brethren, not only because that put me in the company of Garrison Keillor, who was also born into that community, along with several other people. Jim Wallace comes from that background as well. Because in many ways, the dysfunctions of fundamentalist religion, It really was our specialty as Plymouth Brethren. And the theology of dispensationalism that really gave rise to Christian Zionism before there was even an organized Jewish Zionism. This is my heritage. And the irony is, this diagram you see is one of the creations of dispensationalism. It's a way of explaining every single verse in the Bible, ostensibly. And when I was a little boy, about once a year, or every 2 years, a traveling evangelist would come to town. And of course, PowerPoint and slides and projectors weren't invented then, but they had big canvas versions of this chart from the chart on the course of time from eternity to eternity. And this would be strung up across our church. It was the closest we ever got to anything high-tech or ornamental in our church. And the preacher would explain all of time, the past, present, future, all of which was completely mapped out. It was a film that had already been shot in God's mind, and we were just watching it play out.
Now, this is the man who the Emergent Church says is the kind, genteel Brian McLaren. He goes on to talk about the terror texts in the Bible, texts of terror, and he talks about Jesus returning in Revelation chapter 19, and then he talks about Martin Luther, and then there's a question here at the end, and I'll just play a short little bit of that. Well, I guess I won't, because I forgot to put the clip in. So I'll tell you what he said.
Do you think that peace in Israel will signal the end times?
That passage that I referred to, the people who love to quote that, both of the examples I gave of people quoting that, miss one small detail of the text, which is the guy who rides in on the white horse. Two things. First, the sword is coming out of his mouth. So unless you imagine, you know, you want to take that literally, it's sort of comic, you know. No, look, if it's coming out of his mouth, I think that's another way of telling us that the unarmed, gentle Jesus who rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, relating to a prophecy of the Hebrew prophet Zechariah, who talked about an end to war making, comes in, weeps because Jerusalem doesn't know what makes for peace, that was even more powerful than the swords of empire. I think that's the real message of that text. Another detail is that before the battle starts, he's already stained in blood. A message, I think, a way of saying that blood is his own blood. It's the blood of a victim. It's the powerless victim that overcomes the violence of the oppressor. So I think that is a powerful things are happening in the way we read the Bible now.
Is the rebirth of Israel a sign of the end times? And the answer is yes, if you're not Brian McLaren. If you're Brian McLaren, no, you know, this is the book of Revelation is about people struggling against empire and how people make peace in the context of being in an oppressive empire. And he turns it into this left-wing gobbledygook. I'm going to have to skip over this. This is Caroline Glick's article from Friday, Jerusalem Post. She says this. She says, you know, U.S. to fight this, you need to be able to honestly assess the issue. George Bush had a problem because he wanted to maintain relations with the Saudis, so he really couldn't come out and tell the truth about Islam. And then she says this about Obama. As for Obama, his speech in Cairo to the Muslim world in June 2009 and his subsequent apology tour through Islamic capitals indicated that, unlike Bush, Obama understands that al-Qaeda is not a deviation from otherwise peaceful Islamist culture, but unlike Bush, Obama blames America for its hostility. Obama's radical sensibilities tell him that America pushed the Islamists to oppose it. As he sees it, he can appease the Islamists into ending their war against America. To this end, Obama has prohibited federal employees from conducting any discussion or investigation of Islamist doctrine, terrorism strategy, and methods and the threat that they all pose to the U.S. This has ways of playing out. This is Brian Schrager, who's a great Christian blogger. That's a picture of him at Christ at the Checkpoint Conference in March in Bethlehem. He lives in the area known as the West Bank. He talks about this week that a group of 5 Muslim men came to his apartment, told him that he needed to come with them. They took his passport, his cell phone, and then for a number of hours he was held at a building and told essentially, if you don't, we read your website, we see that you support Israel. If you don't leave the West Bank, it would be best for you to leave the West Bank to protect your own safety. Now, Stephen Sizer, do you know who Stephen Sizer is? He's an Anglican bishop in England who is very much supportive of the Palestinian cause. So in response to Brian Schrager, who said, I just left everything and now I'm living with friends and trying to rebuild my life, Stephen Sizer sent this on his Twitter account. Did you enjoy PA Palestinian Authority hospitality? And this is done in the context this week of the kidnapping of 3 Jewish young men in Israel and the massive thousands of soldiers and things that are looking for them, believed to be by Hamas. The Palestinian foreign minister got up and said Israel is overreacting on the missing teens. The Hamas guy got on TV and said it is a milestone in the history of the resistance and the Palestinian struggle that we've been able to do this. A UN official, I have a video of him, a UN official got up and said, well, there's really no evidence that it was a kidnapping. And then this tweet from Stephen Sizer, the same Anglican bishop, this is a man who calls himself a Christian, okay, was this. The abduction of 3 yeshiva students in the West Bank last Thursday was ordered in advance by Israel. Now that makes no sense. The map of the Middle East is changing rapidly. There are these massive refugee camps. We know that there's an article in the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs that just came out this week that talks about the change in demographics. And so I think this is going to lead to some prophecy people changing their charts because the facts on the ground have changed. And I think it makes scenarios about a Psalm 83 war, Obadiah, Israel dealing with the Palestinian issue, it makes them more likely today, I think, than they ever have been. But what's happening is that for example, in Damascus, this is Greater Damascus on a map. And within Damascus, there's this is a Palestinian refugee camp. Now, this is about 1 mile, so it's less than a square mile. And it's right in the city of Damascus. That's, downtown in the center up there. And Al Yarmouk was destroyed by the Syrian army during the war in an effort to drive the Palestinians out of Syria to someplace else. Now, how much have you heard evangelicals who go out and castigate Israel over and over and over again about the oppression of the Palestinian people? Have you heard one evangelical that does this? Have they said anything about the kidnapping of the 3 Jewish young men? Have they said one thing about the destruction of Yarmouk? And if you think that that is not significant, folks, this is a picture of Yarmouk. In that area were over 400,000 Palestinians. In less than a square mile, 400,000 Palestinians have lived there by and large and reproduced there by and large since 1948 or 1967. And Assad, the Arabs don't like him. The Arabs oppress them. And it's Israel's problem. Satan has blinded these people's minds and hearts to the truth. And so all of these different populations, Shia and Sunni, are moving. So many Sunnis have gone to Lebanon that it's upsetting the politics in Lebanon. So many Sunnis have left Syria and gone to Jordan that it has essentially, Jordan doesn't care about the Palestinians anymore. The Palestinians and Sunnis have gone over to Lebanon. Well, what's the effect of that? Well, that's where Hezbollah is located. Hezbollah is Shia and supported by Iran. And now Hezbollah, word is, they are actually looking for assistance in their plight from Israel. What I'm saying is that the facts on the ground change very rapidly, and I think we just need to get your Bible open, get aware of what the prophetic scriptures say, pay attention to the news, because things are going to unfold very quickly as we get close to the end. The map of the Middle East is changing. We know that it's radically going to change at the end of the 70th week of Daniel when Jesus returns, and that's what we're really hopeful for. We know Jesus will come and take us out at some point, and we're hopeful of that, but we don't know what things look like before that happens. We don't know what it's going to look like in America. I mean, go tell, the Christians in Mosul, they've been beheaded. They're either all gone or they're beheaded or killed or shot. So the admonition in Scripture is to stay faithful to the end. And God will protect us. And look, the hope you have is that if you're not here, you're with Christ. And that's the hope that we all have. However that all plays out, whether it's through persecution, martyrdom, rapture, whatever, that's our hope, is to be with the Lord. And that's what we should be keeping our minds on, living holy lives, focused on that all the time. So let's pray, and then we'll continue on with the communion. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for giving us the prophetic word and the scriptures and instruction of things to watch for and be prepared for, so that we can understand the things that are coming upon the world. Thank you for that. And Lord, help us take those scriptures and apply them to our lives and be motivated to live holy lives, always keeping in mind that our hope, however or whenever we depart from this life, we will be in your presence for eternity. Help us be motivated to do that. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.